Good morning and welcome to the special council meeting. First, I want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, in particular the Qualicum First Nation. So we have the agenda for the special council meeting. There's one item. So could I, can we add any to the agenda? Thank you. Then the agenda is adopted by consent. And the one item is the parcel tax roll review panel agenda. I'll turn it over to Mr. Hare.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the objective and purpose of a parcel tax review panel is to discuss and approve the parcel tax roll to ensure fairness, transparency, and accountability in the parcel tax assessment and applications. So the East Village Local Area Service was established by bylaw in 2022. The bylaw approved borrowing of up to $1,325,000 to pay for improvements in the East Village local area. The bylaw requires the amount borrowed to fund those improvements to be repaid through a parcel tax applied on the basis of street frontage to properties that are included within the local area service. Property owners in the local area service have the option to either pay the annual parcel tax on an annual basis or make a one-time full payment upfront to cover their share of the costs of those improvements. So 2 of the 3 property owners paid their full share upfront, and 1 property owner elected to pay their share through an annual property tax over the next 30 years. So the parcel tax roll that's attached to your agenda there contains the address, the name of the property owner, the taxable frontage, and the annual property tax to be recovered from the owner for debt servicing costs for the amount to be borrowed. Consequently, we'll be borrowing about, I'll just give you a round number, $575,000 for the 1 property owner's share. Public notice was given as required by legislation. The parcel tax owners had an opportunity to send in complaints prior to this parcel tax hearing and appear in person for the parcel tax review panel to hear their complaints. There were no complaints received. As such, staff are recommending that council authenticate the parcel tax roll to be used for the parcel tax bylaw, which will be introduced to council at today's council meeting. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the council or the parcel tax review panel may have.
Thank you. Any questions to Mr. Hare? Then a recommendation? Go ahead.
Sure. Well, I'll move the staff recommendation first.
Thank you. Seconded. Councillor Skipsey, discussion. Councillor Harrison.
Oh, just in the previous council term, folks were saying, why did some of these businesses not pay the sort of rent you'd see, say, sorry, Councillor Young might pay for her building, forgive me, but it's because they actually have to buy the building, they're paying the local area service improvement too. There's a lot of extra fees. So just pointing that out in case some folks remember some of the hubbub over that in the previous term.
Thank you. Good reminder. So any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, staff, for preparing this and a very efficient explanation of how things are done. Appreciate it. So with that, a motion to adjourn. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander, all in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned. And we'll reconvene in about half an hour.
just go, yeah.
Test, test, test.
All right, I got the thumbs up, meaning the technical issues have been resolved, and we also have an overflow area in the lobby. So we'll continue. There were no changes to the agenda, so the agenda is adopted by consent. And then we have the adoption of the consent agenda. Anything council would like to discuss on that? Seeing none, then the consent agenda is adopted by consent as well. And then we have the minutes of the January 31st, March 13, March 19, 27, and 28 council meetings. Any errors or omissions? Thank you. The only thing that I thought was should have been, in my opinion, part of the minutes, on page 35, it talks about the. Let me see, where is this? Dave Bryan spoke, and he mentioned a couple of important issues, but he also mentioned the concern he had about people parking downstairs, shopping upstairs, and then bringing the buggies down, and where to leave them and all that. So there was a concern raised about that, and I think that was an important issue to have to deal with. With that, there are no other comments. Then the minutes are approved by consent. There's business arising from the minutes, and that is that we accept a report, draft bus garage concept design, and report to be received for information. Councillor Harrison, Councillor Vander, discussion. Councillor Harrison.
So just before the meeting, there's one thing Councillor Skipsey and I were discussing, sort of coming out of the committee of the whole meeting. And it was going back to the traffic flow data, which was done in November, I believe.
Yes.
And so the discussion at the time was, well, what about the summertime where we have a lot more tourists coming in than in November, and it might be significantly different? And while there's an estimation to that, like they did account for that, it's still just sort of a guess. And we were sort of wondering if we looked at one or two sites in the summertime, would that be something the consultant could monitor, or how much would that cost us? And just through the chair to staff to give a rough ballpark for that.
Thank you. Through Mr. Seals.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison. There is an assumption in the community that the summer is busier for parking and traffic flow. So we are looking to validate that. We do have parking data that was taken during the summer at several points in the past. So we're comparing that with the parking data that was captured on site during the November period of time. So we're hoping to use that as a bit of a checkpoint to see how far off those various numbers might be. So the consultant is looking at that option and hoping to approximate as much accuracy as possible, by correcting seasonally with the data that we have. So it is on the consultant's radar, and we hope to have a better answer. Thank you.
Thank you. follow up?
Okay, and just sort of thinking off the top of my head, forgive me, but I know we have a couple of the sort of meters which measure how fast cars are going. And I was just thinking if we sort of put them by some of the intersection points, just for one thing, you don't have to check how fast they're going, just how many cars go by. So we might actually already have the tools to figure out those traffic flows in at least 2 directions. And then that might be a cheap way to do it. And if I'm totally off, please correct me if I'm completely wrong on that.
No, you're not, and we can pass that information on to the consultant. Thank you. Anything else? As far as the report, and that came up during the conversation as well, that by the time this new store gets built, and the staff at QF at any given time about 50 people, then Farmer Safe, also a very busy store, and Naked Naturals, you could be looking about 100 parking lots you need for staff, and then if there's a shift change, there could even be more pressure. So I would like to see some kind of plan to deal with staff parking. Many of them need to use the car to get to work, but they also take the spots for shoppers, so there's a bit of a conflict there. So I think to have a plan is how to deal with that, that would be a good thing to consider. Thank you. So with that, it was moved by Councillor Harrison, seconded by Councillor Vander. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. And next we have the St. Andrew's Lodge Historical and Cultural Society to make a presentation. Michael Goldman and Jay Smith, you have up to 5 minutes.
Great, thank you. Good morning. The St. Andrew's Lodge Historical and Cultural Society has made it into the final flight of 12 heritage projects nationwide in a competition for a $50,000 grand prize. The competition is called The Next Great Save, and it's organized by the National Trust for Canada. And we've gone through the first stage of the competition, and we were one of 12 chosen, so we're pretty impressed with that ourselves. In order to win, the society must garner more votes from the general public than any of the other competitors. And last year's winner was the Duncan train station, and they had more than 76,000 votes. The competition is fairly short, 2.5 weeks. The timeline is very tight. So today is the first day we've been allowed to announce our candidacy for this. We've been strictly sworn not to say anything, and if we did, we were going to be disqualified. So today is the day. Voting begins next week, Thursday, April 18th. I believe it's open from 7 a.m. Eastern time. So if you're up in the night, vote. Those who register to vote will be allowed to vote every day until the competition closes on May 6th, and the winner will be announced the following day. There are 3 prizes. The first is $50,000, second is $10,000, third is $5,000. We want the big one. Last year, the second prize winner got over 50,000 votes, so we need you all pressing the button. We're requesting the town's support for our campaign in as many ways as possible. Publicizing the voting opportunities via the municipal social media outlets and town tidings would be very much appreciated. And we're open to any other ideas that town staff or councillors might have to help us garner votes and win the grand prize and continue to move ahead with the restoration of St. Andrew's Lodge. We're making very good progress on that. As you know, we got a federal grant, of which we received the first payment on May 1st. So we're expecting sometime in May that we'll submit our application for a building permit and work will start. I guess we were given a 2-week time frame to do all this from the moment we were notified we'd been selected. We've had to produce a 1-minute video, all the blurbs for social media, and produce photographs that convince the public to vote for us. All that is going to come up on April 18th. You can't look at it now, but we're going to show you the video that we produced, which we're quite impressed with it.
St. Andrew's Lodge, located in beautiful Satland Park in Qualicum Beach, Vancouver Island, was built and operated for more than 80 years by the Little family, who made many significant contributions to the community. Generations of lodge guests from all over the world treasure their memories of time spent here. The lodge came very close to meeting the Wreckers Ball in late 2020, but a protest by hundreds of local residents managed to halt the demolition. By that time, though, extensive damage had been done to the interior of the building. The St. Andrew's Lodge Historical and Cultural Society needs your support to restore and maintain this heritage gem and make it the beloved community hub that it once was.
Thank you. And I think on every seat today, we put up one of these, which we hope you'll take home and get ready. The first thing you do on April 18th is press the vote button, please. Okay, any questions for anyone?
Any question, Councillor Harrison?
Yes, just to remind the public, how large was that federal grant that you received?
$211,318.
So just for the clarity, when originally I wasn't sure to support this, I was told that that sort of grant was an impossibility. So I just want to compliment you guys. That's a very rare grant. It's very difficult to get. And a lot of work clearly went into that. So hat tip, well done.
Thank you very much. It was an incredible amount of work. We put 300 hours into that.
Yes, very determined. And thank you on behalf of the town, council, and everybody else, the work you're doing. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. And next we have the presentation regarding Sue Big Oil by John Wood and Len Flint. And I know this can be kind of a passionate issue for some people. I'll get quite passionate about it. But this is part of the respectful workplace. So whenever somebody is speaking, please don't interrupt, don't cheer, don't applaud, just listen respectfully. And everybody who wants to speak can make a delegation, not today because we've got it already on the agenda. But I want everybody, whether you agree or disagree, to listen respectfully. That's what we would appreciate as a council and as staff. And each other. Thank you. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. We thank the Council for the opportunity to speak on the matter more formally known as Sue Big Oil, and it's all one word. Len and I have a long-term interest in this subject and have subscriptions to various expert and comment sites on climate change issues, so we're offering a balanced review. We both have sufficient science and engineering backgrounds to fully understand both sides of the debate, which is sadly lacking in the mainstream media who like to promote future disasters. Len will make the presentation and speak for the both of us. Len has 27 years of direct involvement in emission accounting for existing major projects and new emission reduction technologies. He has advised provincial and federal governments on emission reduction potential of energy sources. Over the last 2 years, he's provided advice to the town on ways for us here locally to address our carbon footprint. So Len will now present our reasons for the town to reject participation in this class action lawsuit. Len.
Thank you, John. Now, just make sure I've got this going. Oh, good. Thank you. Well, thank you also from myself for the opportunity to speak to you today. We have a slide presentation. I'm going to get through it as quickly as I can, probably around 4 minutes, because some of it has detail that I think many of us should know. So the question before us is, should this town be part of this class action suit? It's been the subject of some amusement and raised eyebrows in the coffee shops that we frequent in town. And generally speaking, the people we've spoken to think that this is something we should not be doing. In short, it's a lawyer-led drive, taking us beyond the bounds of what we consider to be effective municipal government. Next 2 slides are going to go very quickly. We're not here to try the case, but worth a little context. What Sue Big Oil will not be telling any judges when they put forward their request for or advice on whether they have a case. I've highlighted that one in the middle. Reduced forest harvesting, very important here. Not sure whether people know this, but if you were to remove all of, or replace all of the fossil fuel energy that we have to drive our homes and commercial industry here in town, we would be clear-cutting something like 10% of our own forests every year. So that is something that the fossil fuel industry has brought to us. I'm not going to go over this in much detail at all, but I think we all know there are differences of opinion regarding whether it's a crisis or whether it's manageable challenges, but there's human ability to adapt, and we see that increasingly evident. Addressing some of the big oil claims, I'm just going to go with the one at the bottom, sharing the cost burden. Most measured impacts are actually down when adjusted for inflation and GDP, not up. The oil industry currently, oil and gas industry currently contributes about 60 billion annually to the various levels of government, and also obviously drive the need for the carbon tax, which is about 12 billion a year right now, 25 by 2030. But we spend that on a vote-seeking wealth redistribution for some obscure reason. So let's go to the main issue here. Who has the power to force action? Higher government levels, it's a global challenge. They are exercising that power to drive the energy transition, as we know, a transition which I support. They are also have the power to sue for damage compensation, but in Canada have chosen so far not to do so. Who will be at the forefront of that energy transition? Big energy, not just the oil and gas, nuclear and other forms, solar, wind, and so on, all going to be part of that transition. The oil and gas have been investing billions in this transition for many years. What happens if a large court-based financial penalty hits them? Probably a net zero economic situation that you can count on there. They'll simply say, well, that's part of our contribution. And then we'll continue to demand their products. If that sounds a little like a Fawlty Towers episode, so be it. Who should balance the positives and the challenges? Big government obviously has the right to push, and big energy skills will help solve those problems. Lawyers have to us no helpful role other than to muddy the waters and slow useful progress. The Council and others may know there are many such lawsuits happening worldwide right now. None of them appear to include dollars, much of it virtue signaling, call it what you like. But these are long processes, 5-10 years before anything like this really gets settled. And then, of course, there's countersuing, which is happening right now. So locally, what do we recommend for Qualicum Beach? Our straw poll suggests a majority in the town agree. Act locally to reduce our environmental impact. We declared a climate emergency 2 years ago. No action yet, but hopefully some this year. We believe we should reject virtue signaling from an activist minority and reject lawyers' drive for decade-long court actions at our expense. BC municipalities have greater priorities. Get refocused. What about locally? We've got infrastructure issues. We have ahead of us, I think, 4 years of tax increases that will double the inflation rate. We have environmental issues, we have forest issues, we have biosphere issues. These are ways that we could spend $10,000 better at the local level, in our opinion. So our opinion is, and our recommendation is, stay in your lane for municipal government. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you both, John and Len. Any questions to the delegation? Seeing none, thank you very much for a well-prepared presentation. Appreciate it. Thank you. The next item is bylaws, and the first one is the zoning amendment 2030, 2050, 2070 Rupert Road East. I'll turn it over to Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. I do have some slides. While they're being pulled up, I'll just provide a brief introduction. So this is a zoning amendment application for a property. Actually, I'll just wait a moment while those that are leaving have the opportunity to do so. Okay, I will proceed. Those leaving, they don't know what they're going to miss. So this zoning amendment application for 230, 250, 270 Rupert Road East, this is for a property that's currently zoned for rural residential. It was previously taken out of the ALR because of the history. It was actually added to the ALR approximately 15 years ago. Next slide. So this property is near the intersection of Memorial and Rupert Road that would be just east of the town's water infrastructure and the fire hall. There are three strata parcels on this larger parent parcel. One of them contains a commercial building, which was previously a garden center, and then there are 2 residential properties adjacent to it. The proposal is to amend the zoning so that each of these strata parcels could have a residential dwelling. So instead of the 2 residential dwellings with potential for 2 additional suites, you would have a new residential potential, so there would be a residential conversion of that old garden center building for a total of 6 units on that parcel. Next slide. This is an overview of the location of the existing dwellings and the commercial building. The commercial building would be the property on the left side of the screen that you see there, which is the west side. Next slide. If council just does choose to advance with this application, council can give multiple readings at the meeting today. So because the public hearing process is no longer a requirement, council could give 3 readings and subsequently adopt at this meeting. Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. If there are any questions, I'd be pleased to take them.
Thank you. Any question to delegation? You'd make a good delegation, actually, to Mr. Sales. Councillor Harrison.
I'd like to thank him for the well-prepared delegation. Yeah. So I just want to check, in terms of Bill 44, so it's a strata property currently. So if they were to wait for the June 30th date, would that allow 4 units per each strata property, or just 4 units for the property as a whole?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison. Because this property is outside of the urban containment boundary, and it's also larger than the size that's targeted by Bill 44, it would not be affected.
Thank you. May I suggest that we focus on page 45. There's a alternative number 1, and if I have a seconder, I will speak to it. Councillor Skipsey, seconding. And so the reason why I'm supporting alternative number 1 is there are currently 2 residential units, and I don't want to further increase the density, residential density on this site, or set a precedent for other properties. So that's my reasoning. Any further discussion? Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, well, I do actually disagree with that, as it's largely in line with the OCP. I mean, we're doing essentially a zoning amendment, not an OCP amendment. And we do need to actually densify more, as opposed to having more horizontal sprawl that'll spread out into rural areas surrounding us. There's a lot to be said about this property. There's some opportunities there, but I have to be really circumspect. But no, I wouldn't support refusing it on those grounds.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Any further discussion? All in favor? Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander, Councillor Young, Mayor Westbrook. Opposed? Councillor Harrison. Thank you. And the next item is the zoning amendment for 630 Hemlock Street. Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. This is a zoning amendment application for a property on Hemlock Street. Next slide. The property is within the village neighborhood, which is the area intended by the town for densification. So it's an area where zoning amendments for increased residential density have generally been approved in the past. So next slide. The proposal is to take a larger residential property and subdivide it into three parcels, each of which could have a house and a suite. The plan up on the screen that you see are actually 3 different alternative ways to incorporate the suite onto the site, either completely detached, partially detached, or completely detached. So the proposal at this time is to permit the density. This is an example of how that density could actually be realized on the site. Next slide. This is a perspective rendering of what these 3 parcels could look like after they're developed. So there is a form and character covenant that has been registered on the parcel. So if council does choose to advance with this proposal, the net product would be something very similar to this. Next slide. So just a bit of housekeeping and clarification, because Bill 44 continues to come up. So just a quick reminder that the town is not permitted to hold a public hearing for this proposal, and that's directly resulting from Bill 44. And the question has also come up, well, what happens if council doesn't advance with this zoning amendment application? Would Bill 44 increase the density? So yes, Bill 44 would result in the increased density on this parcel. However, it would not enable the parcel to be subdivided into 3 smaller parcels. So maybe a potential or likely result would be that a 4-plex would be constructed on the site, or some other means of realizing that density. And I would also like to note that there's a new residential 21 zone that has been drafted specifically for this site, but we do anticipate that specific zone will no longer be required after the Bill 44 amendments come through, because the default setbacks will be greatly reduced throughout the town. So next slide. The recommendation is that this bylaw amendment be adopted. The covenant has been registered and the rest of the process has proceeded to this point. So that is the recommendation. If there are any questions, I would take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sales. For discussion, Councillor Harrison.
Just moving the staff recommendation.
Moved, seconded, Councillor. So moved by Councillor Harrison, seconded Councillor Young. Further discussion, Councillor Skipsey.
I'm just going to make a couple of quick comments. I mean, I still don't feel like I know the whole picture, what it's going to look like how how trees are going to be left, how many trees will be replanted, will there be rain gardens, because now there's going to be a lot of impervious surfaces on quite a small area. And so, yeah, I just, having that vision, I would have been more comfortable voting in favor. I also, well, I guess I feel a little bit better that knowing that the buildings will be a bit more energy efficient and emit a little less carbon. And originally I had thought this would be a great development to be sort of the poster development for the province's new legislation, but I guess we'll just have to wait for the next one to be that. So I will be voting in favor of the development.
Thank you. I share your sentiments. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Next is the Bill 35 short-term rental vacation rental policy. Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Bill 35 was introduced last year by the province in conjunction with Bill 44, 45, 46, and various other numbers. So as a result of the provincial legislation, staff have prepared a number of amendments. Council is most familiar with the Bill 44 amendments. However, we do want to present Council with an alternative that could respond to some of the short-term vacation rental policy regulations that were adopted. Next slide. So I just have a few overview slides. There's a lot more details in the staff report, but just as a high-level overview, the report that was provided to Council earlier this year indicated that there's approximately 116 short-term vacation rentals in the town. And of those short-term vacation rentals, some of them are bed and breakfasts, some of them are rooms rented in people's houses, some of them are entire houses, some of them are hotel rental suites. So this is just a very simplistic overview of the types of short-term vacation rentals we see in the town, and then I want to go through an overview of how the provincial legislation will affect them. So First of all, the provincial legislation, first and foremost, addresses those short-term vacation rentals that are investor-owned in residential areas. The provincial legislation is intended to bring some of those residential homes and suites back onto the market so that they can be rented long-term. So, next slide. So essentially that takes out, I believe it was around 35 or 40 of the 116 short-term vacation rentals in the town. So that portion of the short-term vacation rental market will disappear immediately upon the provincial regulations being enforced by the province. So that leaves a few more categories here. So the province does allow the rental of a short-term vacation rental either in your house or your entire house, or it also allows a short-term vacation rental on the same property. So for a lot of people, that would be a suite, either in their backyard or maybe attached to their house, or maybe they go away on holiday and they rent while they're away. So the provincial regulation allows that. However, the town historically has never allowed short-term vacation rentals in residential areas. We allow bed and breakfasts, and we allow short-term vacation rentals in commercial areas. But another aspect of the provincial legislation is that they will be requiring that business licenses be posted in order to get a listing on something like Airbnb or VRBO. And because of that business license requirement, you can't post on those platforms anymore unless the town approves it through a business license. So there's kind of two different frameworks that overlap, and the result is that if you go to the next slide, you see that all those properties where they were renting a vacation rental on their property, but not actually their primary dwelling, those go away because the town could not issue a business license for that purpose. And there is some rationale to not renting suites for vacation rentals because those are dwellings that could otherwise be used for long-term rental. So there's a pretty strong rationale there. So what is left over out of the 116 vacation rentals that we estimate operate in the town? There's approximately 20 that the consultant that provided the report earlier this year indicated. He described those as the true home sharing model. So that would be something where someone's in town, they live there, it's their primary residence, and then they go away for periods of time, and it's rented as a short-term vacation rental during that period of time. So there's approximately 20 of those in the town. Next slide. So another aspect that came up out of that consultant report is that based on the average annual income of our short-term vacation rentals, that's approximately $2 million annually in tourism revenue. So that's the reason that the report is before you today. So if council wants to advance short-term vacation rentals in a way that allows that true home sharing model, then we do have a suite of amendments for you. Next slide. So this is presuming then and proposing that there is a way to partially mitigate some of the negative impact that losing that revenue will have on our tourism industry. And so there's a number of pieces that are included in the potential path forward to address those. It would include bylaw amendments and a policy allowing the issue of temporary use permits for principal residence buildings only. So secondary suites and garden suites, those could be used to help provide rental accommodation in our community, and staff wouldn't recommend allowing those. Even though the province would, that is potentially negatively impacting our rental community. And then secondly, the business license bylaw, municipal ticket information bylaw would also have to be amended because experience in other communities shows that the default ticket amount, when it's too low, it's just not actually a deterrent from those people who choose to rent for that purpose. So next slide. This is a brief summary. There's a number of recommendations and motions in your package, but if council does choose to adopt this or advance this proposal, There would be adoption of the rental policy, amendments to the business license bylaw, zoning bylaw. The town would need to schedule a public hearing. Our municipal ticket information bylaw would need to be amended, as well as our miscellaneous rates bylaw. So with that, I will return it to you, Mayor Westbrook, and I'm pleased to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions to Mr. Sales? Mr. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, I know we're building this off of the report we received from the Tourism Association, but one of their data sources is a website called AirDNA, and I went on it last night, and I don't have a paid subscription. You just sort of log in with your Gmail address, but the one piece of information it did include was the types of rentals, and it said that roughly 90% were the entire home and 10% were not the entire home, essentially. And I'm just curious. I know you're probably just taking the consultant's report, and they had much better sources than I have. I'm just wondering if you knew anything about that discrepancy.
Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison. So the statistics in this report are directly from the consultant report. And interestingly, the consultant report is also taken from AirDNA. So I can't advise on where your observation would differ from the consultants, but it is from the consultant report. Thank you.
And then just sort of to follow up, I think there's certain things where it's good to have a debate. There's other things, though, where we basically need to make a decision whether we allow short-term rentals to operate or not. So there's, in my view, that when we're looking at this long list of staff recommendations, because there's a lot of readings here, it might be helpful to sort of divide them between the things where first decision point, in my view, is do we allow short-term rentals? And then the second decision point after that is if we do, how much? So maybe we should start with a point where do we allow short-term rentals or not as a council, and then have the second conversation after that. That's just my suggestion, because there's 13 recommendations here, and that's a lot. So that might make it a little bit more manageable for where we go.
Thank you. I have a recommendation. If we put up page 105, there's a number of recommendations there. 105 in the agenda. I think that's it. Yeah, thank you. I move number 1 of the alternative options. Okay, if I have a seconder, Councillor Skipsey, discussion. Councillor Harrison.
Just through the chair to Mr. Sales, on some websites I read that if you don't have a business license, if there's no policy from the town regarding business licenses, in essence, then you're still able to post. Is that true, or do you have a hard requirement that you have to have a business license? Because I looked at the legislation and it didn't say anything about an alternative, so I'm just confused by some of the reporting I read on this bill. Thanks.
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison. The legislation does acknowledge that there's many communities in BC that don't have business license requirements at all. So, for example, the regional district of Nanaimo, and they don't require business licenses. You can operate there without anything. The town has long had a business license bylaw in effect, so, and there aren't any exceptions for types of businesses that don't need one. So the default is that if you're operating a business, you do need a business license. So there's no specific exemption for short-term vacation rentals, and with the provincial regulations coming in, the town can't just ignore it. We will either have to issue licenses or they will discontinue. Thank you.
Okay, so this alternative then is a de facto ban on all short-term rentals in Qualicum Beach in every property, just to be clear.
That is correct, except for the bed and breakfasts and those areas where short-term rental would be permitted because it's either has some tourism accommodation in the zoning, like on the waterfront, there's many properties that are zoned C2, which is a commercial zoning that also allows residential. So many of those properties would be allowed to continue subject to the principal residence requirements by the province.
Councillor Harrison, go.
So I'd suggest then that one of the recommendations was to do a public hearing, if I recall correctly. I'm trying to remember where it is, and it's not on the list in the agenda, but it's one of the things that was actually on the projection. I think before we come to a decision, we might just want to say, let's do the public hearing first. hear from the public on this and then make our decision, because if we do essentially do alternative one, then we've made that decision for the entire town, full stop. And I think we want to be careful with that, because there's a pretty big tourism overlay, and we might want to just have that conversation first, would be my suggestion.
Thank you. Councillor Skipsey.
Okay, so originally during strategic planning, we had identified 2027 as the timing for reviewing short-term rentals. And that was because of all the delays, because of the provincial legislation and all of the time that was going to be taking up. So my concern, addressing only some aspects of this really big and complex issue without doing a full and comprehensive review like what was proposed, is not really my preference. That's why I would support the motion, and perhaps we could be setting maybe we can advance that from 2027, but I think it deserves not just a piece here and a piece there, but to look at it fully, because it needs to be equitable to people across the board. Like originally I thought, well, maybe this is the answer to Pheasant Glen and we can do that area, but I think that we need to make sure that it is equitable. I'm also a bit concerned about the impact this would have on staff resources. If this is really how we want to prioritize our valuable staff time. So I'm not sure how monitoring and enforcement would work. And also, arising out of this, I would like to make a motion to write to the province to relay the concerns and the feedback we have received that suites and units won't be, if they're not rented out short-term, they won't be rented out long-term because of the current failures in the BC's Residential Tenancy Act, and that people aren't comfortable with long-term tenants for a whole variety of reasons. So I didn't know if that could be a motion arising from consideration of the report.
I would rule that it is that if we deal with this first, one item at a time, then afterwards you could make that motion. Councillor Vander.
Thank you. Well, essentially I have a lot of concerns about making these changes. I think there's a lot of problems involved in it. I don't know that this is the time to make those changes. I think if we are more clear on what our policy is overall, and that actually is one of the points in the report, that the town needs to be very clear about what exactly their short-term, vacation rental policy is. And so I agree with having a more in-depth study done at a later date, which is what we outlined in our strategic plan, which has had to be pushed back to 2027 based on all the BCR, the Housing Bill 44 work that needs to be done. I did have concerns about the Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism Association has long been supportive of looking at the short-term rental situation, not only because they're concerned about resorts being used, but also because they're very concerned that they don't have enough accommodation for people that work in the tourism industry. And so if suites are being rented out on a short-term basis that could be used for staff, whether it's in the tourism industry or whether it's at the coffee shops in town, we need to look at more affordable workforce housing. And I think that the short-term rentals take away from that pool. So I have concerns about that. And also in the report, there were numbers outlined about the revenue from tourism that would be lost if suites weren't rented out. But there also was a section in there, a little graph picture, that was about the extra amount of money that people are having to spend for housing, which I think in the area overall was $15.6 million. I think on page 118, if I remember correctly. It's a little picture. Yeah, page 118, renter households are estimated to have paid $15.6 million more in rent between 2016 and 2021 as a direct result of commercial short-term rental activity in the broader Parksville-Qualicum Beach corridor. So I think we have to look at, yes, there may be some tourism monies that could potentially be lost, but there's also rental accommodation that's costing people more to live here that won't be available. So I'm in favor of the motion. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
Well, I'd like to believe that we live in a utopia where we all understand and try to help each other. And all these legislations that we want to possibly change out what the provincial government has handed down to us, it supposedly they're doing it for our good, and that is to free up accommodations for people that need lower priced rentals or more available rentals, and also for rentals to house people that work for us, that are in the service industry. Yeah, you know, sure, we might lose some tourism dollars because we don't have the short-term rentals, but more importantly, we need to be able to support the workers that are here for us. And I'd like to say that we don't have to rule or legislate anything, but just hope that everybody will just realize what the need is out there and maybe switch your short-term rental to a long-term rental and help the rest of society out in our community. And but I will vote for motion 1 here.
Further discussion. Councillor Harrison.
So just through the chair to staff, if we adopt alternative 1, will Pheasant Glen be able to list any of the units on as a short-term rental, yes or no?
Sometimes it's not just a straight answer, but I think the tone, I don't like the tone, so we need to change the tone a little bit, please. Thank you.
At the risk of speaking more than one word, it is more complex. The hotel portion of Pheasant Glen will be able to be rented short-term. The remainder of the dwellings remain to be seen as to whether they comply with the province's principal residence requirement. And I would like to also clarify that the town has no role in enforcing the province's principal residence requirement. We don't have the authority, and we don't have the tools to do it. The province has made it very clear. So if they're able to meet the province's legislative requirements for principal residence, then the remainder of the site would also be able to be used in that way. The hotel portion should meet their definition. Thank you.
And just to add to that, to your question, I did have a chance to speak with the Premier a couple of weeks ago when he was in town, and I mentioned specifically Pheasant Glen. I said they're having a large, 40-room large, but there's also potentially 185 rental cottages and villas, and they're supposed to be able to put them in the rental pool. And he told me, and that's a quote, we're working on that. So I trust that your concern will be relayed. Thank you.
I think, though, it's also under the standing, again, I read Bill 35 last night. I went over the legislation line by line. There's no exemption from the business license requirement. There isn't. So if we don't have a business license for an Airbnb, the website is required to remove the listing. So I'm just saying, functionally, it will not work as a result of that requirement. Unless there's an out in the legislation, then that business license requirement supersedes the recent amendment which was announced. It was not a verbal exemption for the city of Parksville, unfortunately. I was at the same event and I raised the same issue with the Premier as well. What it actually is it requires you have to have an on-site staff to do cleaning. There's a few other requirements. It's listed on the provincial website for the press release. You can read it. And as it would be coming into effect soon, and it's Pheasant Glen to be built in the future, there's a list of requirements, right? It does make it very clear if you're not already operating by a certain date, here are the requirements you have to have. But again, without a business license, the province will basically tell Airbnb, you have to remove the listing from your website. It's the province who does the enforcement on that. So this is why I think we have to be very careful if we don't allow business license to be used for something that is exactly why we want it to be used. We want Pheasant Glen to be used with Airbnb. Otherwise, it is primary residential and nothing else. For the roughly 210 units that are not part of the hotel. I think we should be very careful about that and actually get confirmation before we advance that business, because we might be doing a lot more harm than good. This is something, again, where I do urge a lot of caution. I think the province is taking a pretty aggressive stance on STRs, and what we really should be doing is actually making sure we're meeting the provincial requirements, and then in 2 years let people know if you're operating a short-term rental, we might adopt more stringent regulations in 2 years' time, but if we adopt alternative one, we shut it down for the whole town without much public debate, and I think that's a mistake.
Thank you. And I think this total of 220 units, so it's 40 and 180, but I understand you're pretty concerned. Yeah. Further discussion? Councillor, yeah.
Can I get clarification at Pheasant Glen, the other building that we're talking about could possibly be Airbnb? Are they not also considered on commercial property like the hotel?
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Young. So that as council recently reviewed, we had a development permit application for the hotel portion that will be owned by by one single owner, not strata titled independently. So that is considered to be a hotel, at least the way it was described in the proposal that council reviewed. So subject to any changes between now and the building permit, it is the town's expectation that that will be eligible for a business license under the category of hotel.
Further discussion. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, I think this is something which has huge ramifications for a huge project. So I suggest a motion to defer to a subsequent meeting, and then staff can provide a report just to provide clarity about the impacts. Because respectfully, if the answer is I'm not sure, I don't think we should make a hard decision on one of the largest projects in town.
Thank you. Further discussion?
There's a motion to defer.
Motion to defer. Is there a seconder? No seconder. Motion fails. So on the motion on the floor, further discussion. All in favor? Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander, Councillor Young, Mayor Westbrook opposed. Councillor Harrison. Everybody got that? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So the next item is the property tax rates bylaw. Mr. Sales.
Mayor Westbrook, I just noted that Councillor Skipsey had an indication about a motion she wanted to make. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so I would like to make a motion arising out of consideration of the last report that council write to the province outlining comments and feedback we have received that suites and units not used for short-term rentals will not be rented out to long-term tenants because of the current failures of the BC's Residential Tenancy Act.
Councillor Vander, discussion. Councillor Harrison.
What are the specific failures you're thinking of, if I may?
My understanding is that currently to evict a tenant, it can take up to 6 months to a year, that there's a long backlog of cases to be heard and whatnot. So, and also, I think it's a balance between landlords' rights and tenants' rights.
Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, so the province has reduced wait times for the rental tenancy branch by 54% within the last 2 years. As per a press release put out 1 month ago, there has been significant investments into RTB. In events, Ravi Kallan at the housing conference mentioned the RTB is actually jumping to the front of the line. If there's an instance where a tenant moves in and doesn't pay any rent, like they pay their damage deposit, and then they expect to get 5 or 6 months for RTB to take forever, they're actually prioritizing those cases so they actually get heard immediately. So if someone's essentially a deadbeat tenant, they get kicked out. So this is something where the province is actually being pretty active. Now, does it address the entire backlog? No, there's still some. And the more complicated the case, the longer it'll take. But I do think this is something where, again, like just for me, taking a common sense approach, okay, let's say you have a short-term rental unit, which becomes a long-term rental, and we're talking about housing for workers. Workers here in the service sector will be making maybe $20 an hour. You're making maybe $40,000 a year, ballpark. The unit, if a one-bedroom is going to be a $1,500 rental, because it's going to go at the market rate. It's two-bedroom, it'll be $2,500 a month. That means you need an income of roughly, well, over $50,000 roughly a year to avoid that 30% threshold, which is sort of where we determine affordability. So it's already a priori going to be unaffordable, just because that's the current market rate. Unless the homeowner, for whatever reason, decides to be very generous and offer cheaper rent. Some people do that. I had an aunt who did that for years, but not many folks will do that, bluntly speaking. So I think this is something where if we're going to essentially say the rental tenancy branch is the problem or the rental tenancy act is the problem, if it's the act, we have to be specific about the failing in the act. If it's the response mechanism, that's the rental tenancy branch. So what's the specific remedy we're seeking, right? To just say that we don't like it, well, if it's not specific, I'm not sure how productive that is. And I'm not trying to be too nitpicky about this, but I do think we have to be very specific about what is the failing we're trying to fix, right? If there's a real problem, I've heard the same comments from folks too, that they don't rent out because they're worried about a bad tenant. But it might be, I just think if we frame it as a failure, which is the motion, I'm not sure it's a complete failure. I think it just might be something where more investment's needed.
Councillor Skipsey, is there any way that you could address that concern in the letter, in your motion?
I would be okay with deferring this until we have, maybe look into that a bit more and have the wording.
Yeah. Yes, and we have a conference coming up this week.
Exactly.
Where we could probably compare notes with some other communities. So a motion to defer this motion. Councillor Young, Councillor Vander Valk. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Property tax rate bylaw. Mr. Hare?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the purpose of the property tax bylaw is to implement 2024 tax rates for the town of Qualicum Beach, including rates for collection of the levy from the Regional District of Nanaimo, the Nanaimo Regional Hospital, and Vancouver Island Regional Library. So Council establishes tax rates annually to determine the tax collected from each property in town. The tax rate is based on every $1,000 of net taxable value of the property. And we have several property classes that exist, and each is taxed at a different rate. Residential properties constitute about 96% of the assessed value of properties in the town and contribute about 90% of the municipal property taxes. In addition to municipal taxes, properties are subject to levies from other institutions, including the provincial government for school tax, the RDN, or Regional District of Nanaimo, Nanaimo Regional Hospital District, as I've mentioned before, Vancouver Island Regional Library, from the Municipal Finance Authority of BC, and from BC Assessment as well. Council has no control over these external levies, but establishes rates for the Regional District of Nanaimo, the Nanaimo Regional Hospital, and Vancouver Island Regional Library based on the requisitioned amounts. Municipal tax rates are set to collect the amount of property tax rate that was approved in the 2024 to 2028 financial plan bylaw, which was approved by Council earlier this year. The implications of that are a 7.7% increase in municipal tax revenue that is contemplated for 2024. The tax increase translates to an additional $164 for the average home that's valued at $956,000. However, increases to individual households would vary depending on the assessed values of their property. The annual property tax bylaw must be adopted by council by May 15th of each year. Staff are recommending that the town of Qualicum Beach property tax bylaw 790 2024 be read a first, second, and third time so that it can be adopted before May 15th as required by legislation. And I'd be happy to address any questions, and I'll turn it over to you, Mayor Westbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Hare. Questions from council? Just a comment that when you get your tax bill, I think we get to keep about 45%. The rest goes to all these other authorities. So we're not even a major player. We're a junior player of this tax increase. They just make us collect it for you and get the bad reputation that they were charging too much on taxes. So could I have a motion for the first reading? Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander Valk. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. And for second reading, Councillor Vander Valk, Councillor Young. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. And for third reading, Councillor Harrison, Councillor Vander Valk. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. And then the East Village Local Service Parcel Tax Bylaw, Mr. Hare.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the purpose of Bylaw 791 in front of you, attached to the staff report, is to introduce a parcel tax aimed at recovering the debt servicing costs of long-term debt for capital improvements that were made in the East Village Phase 2 project in 2023. In April 2022, the Town of Qualicum Beach Council passed a bylaw facilitating improvements in the East Village as a local area service. The improvements are financed by borrowing of up to $1,325,000 with repayment through a parcel tax based on property street frontage. Property owners have the choice between annual payments by paying interest over time or a one-time upfront full payment of their share of the cost of those improvements. 2 of 3 property owners have paid their portion upfront. The third owner has elected to pay annually through a parcel tax over 30 years. Annual parcel tax payments of just over $35,000 will be required to service just over $575,000 of borrowing. The implementation of the parcel tax can only be implemented through bylaw. So Bylaw 791/2024 facilitates the collection of these payments commencing 2024. Staff recommend that the parcel tax bylaw 791/2024 be read a first, second, and third time. And again, I'd be happy to address any questions or any issues that I may not have addressed that council may have concern on.
Thank you, Mr. Hare. Councillor Harrison.
Is it possible to remove all 3 readings at once?
I think for these types of reading, from my experience, you do one at a time, although
fair
it seems more efficient, but because of the readings, we should be one at a time. So any questions, Councillor Skipsey? Okay. Move first reading. We read for the first time. Seconded, Councillor Harrison. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? And for second reading, Councillor Vander Valk, Councillor Young. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. And for third reading, Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander Valk. Discussion. All in favor? Thank you. It carried unanimously, all 3. General government, I just want to say what a wonderful celebration of all the energy and services Mr. Pat Weber has given to the town, is still giving to the town. There's actually a bench by the flags that will be sponsored. The town actually sponsored, so we'll be there permanently. And his wife chose that location because what Mr. Weber has done for both Kiwanis Housing, for the Chamber of Commerce, for the PQ Foundation, and for the senior center, which now has over 1,000 members. So he's done a lot of work trying to help organize events and make these organizations work, including the Parks for Qualicum Beach Foundation. Second, we had a wonderful event this weekend for the Brand Festival. Perhaps it would be appropriate to send a letter to the Mount Airsmith Biosphere region, especially Mandy Hepkirk, for her efforts to help celebrate the Brand Festival at the liftoff and other events. And lastly, the bridge for the golf course on the 5th tee to green is under. I'm not going to say it's under budget. It looks like it may be, but it could also be some additional costs. So I'm saying it's on budget, on time, and hopefully that will all work well. In a couple of months, we'll know the result of that. There was a bit of a time crunch because we thought that the work at the culvert couldn't start till June 15. But apparently there is a bit of a conflict, perhaps there may be some conflict with the equipment that both of these organizations that build the bridge and the culvert replacement have. So, but I'm sure Mr. Watson, Dickinson can work that out. Thank you. That's my report. Councillor Harrison.
Okay, so there's a surprising amount of things to go over. Also, too, just for the Pat Weber event, that started at coldest night of the year, and I just, by good fortune, ended up walking alongside Violet Hayes, and then I ran into Renata Sutherland, who mentioned some information I didn't know about. And then, so I brought it to council, and I actually want to give a lot of credit to the mayor because he used his Rolodex to invite a lot of people. That was actually a really touching ceremony. I'm really glad we did that. For other things, Habitat for Humanity unveiled their new project in Nanaimo on Friday of last week, so I was in attendance there. Mostly Nanaimo folks were attending. Interesting, there's a lot of an overlay with the credit union for the community credit union. So I talked to some of the people who work for the credit union. Basically, what Habitat for Humanity is doing is they're shifting their model. The sort of image we have in our head of Jimmy Carter with power tools building a single family home for a nice young family, that model is sort of in the rearview mirror now. And they're becoming a lot more like the building we're building at Railway for Kiwanis and other societies. And it's largely just because there's not enough land and the land is too expensive. And so they can't, if they're only going to be able to build 1 or 2 homes on one lot of land that they might get every several years, that's nowhere near the extent demand for housing for young families. Actually, no, the executive director, he's a childhood friend who lived half block away from me in Prince George, so it's kind of crazy that there he is. But it does make a lot of sense when you look at how many people need support and how much land is actually available. We can't just sprawl horizontally like Edmonton. Interestingly, Edmonton in the last 17 years, housing costs have gone up less than 20%. But that's because they sprawled out so much and they built so much housing. In Vancouver Island, that means you're clear-cutting huge amounts of trees. So that's not really an option for us. Anyways, it was a really interesting event. It was a little bit snazzy, and it was very well put together. Minister Malcolmson was there as well. We have a sort of a housing task force, we call it. Councillor Young and I attend alongside Susanna Newton and some other folks. She's the executive director at SOS. We put together a draft little toolkit for nonprofits, especially faith-based organizations would be great. And it sort of lays out some of the things you have to do if you're going to get ready to apply for BC housing funding or CMHC funding. I know I've talked to some of my colleagues in Parcel have talked to folks at a church in Parcel that's thinking about maybe doing something. There's a church in town which is thinking of maybe doing something. So it's just to try to provide some rough guidelines for folks, some questions to ask about the land use and whatnot. Then Homeless Task Force is today in a few hours. There's a track meeting on the 2nd, but my car had a bit of a flat tire, so I couldn't attend. But I did forward the PDF that was provided at the meeting. It does look like things are moving along with that project, long overdue. I will point out again, there was in 2018, School District 69, or Oceanside, Recreation Master Plan at the RDN. We have that is the first project in that entire planning document in 6 years. That's the only one. Nothing else is even started right now. So I just want to flag, in terms of recreational infrastructure, there's a bit of a deficit. And the last thing is AWS, so I sit on that. So I get updates periodically because I'm on that service. The dam has been overflowing at Arrowsmith Dam for about a month, but the snowpack is pretty low. It's about 54% what it usually is, and this is sort of the lowest level we've seen in some time. So there's a lot of water in the dam. That's a good thing. There's not a lot of snow on the mountain. That's a bad thing. When we start looking at whether or not there'd be water restrictions, I don't want to get ahead of that because I don't have the expertise, but I would highlight again, it's the requirement for the flow at the river and the capacity of the dam, which are the two factors that really cause water restrictions. There's roughly a 5-to-1 ratio between water essentially to meet that requirement and then the water that's actually used for development through the Englishman River Water Service, which we're not a member of. I know the mayor has mentioned some things that I'm concerned about as well regarding water, but I don't want to get too far ahead of that conversation because I'm not sure where it is, but I'll just say that I'm very proud of the work that our previous town engineer, Mr. Weir, did with our water service, and I'm sure that Mr. Dickinson will carry on that great work. And with that, I'll conclude.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Councillor Skipsey.
Okay, thank you. I'll start with the motion that's on the agenda, that the Select Committee on Environment and Sustainability meeting times change from 3 p.m. to 2 p.m.
Second, Councillor Vander, Valk. Councillor, sorry, I was going to ask any discussion on that. Okay, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried unanimously. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And you covered off the Brant Wildlife Festival. Thank you. And I think a letter would be a great idea because this is the first year that the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere has taken the reins. So I'm sure they'd like the feedback. Councillor Vander Valk and I hosted the council open house on Monday, and there were a number of matters that I thought I would just give a brief update on. There was a question around when the landscaping around the cell tower at Eagle Crest will take place, and staff have responded, advising they are looking at naturalized plantings to complement the forest area near the tower, and that they have this on their work plan during April, starting with the design and preparation, and will likely plant in May. There was a request for clarification on a comment that was made at a previous council meeting, that council must select the lowest bid when awarding a tender. And as I understand it, the staff are prepared to give us sort of tenders versus RFPs 101 in a brief comment from staff. If we could ask staff to do that, that would be appreciated.
Is staff prepared to do this?
I am, Your Worship.
You have the floor, Mr. Dickinson.
Thank you. So the way we've done tenders in Qualicum Beach is we do a tender. And so with tender is you can set conditions that you expect aside from price, but you have to be very clear and it has to be quantifiable. So for instance, you could say schedule, we need this done in 2 weeks. So somebody submits and it takes them 3 weeks, then you can disqualify them even if they're the low bid. Otherwise, you have to award the low bid if they're a qualified bidder. So they've met all the qualifications, they've put in everything they need to, and we've checked all the boxes, then it's the low bidder. The courts have found, though, that if you do put in other qualifications, similar to our social procurement, where we've said if it's within 5%, then we can consider social procurement, then you can consider these other factors. And so our tenders to date have only considered social procurement, so we can as we are right now with our consultants revisiting on what we can do, because you do want to do different forms for different tenders. For building a building, for instance, sometimes you want to do what's called a design build, where you hire a team who do the design and the build together, which I think this building was similar to that, where you give an idea of what square footage you want and everything, and then the actual contractor and design team come back with iterations of, does this meet your demands? And then they build it for a certain price. What we tend to do is tenders here for construction, and then RFPs or requests for proposal for services such as engineering. And an RFP, as I switch gears here a bit, is when you're actually looking for quality. It's not like price is important and you weigh it. You'll say price will be 20% of the submission when you're considering the value, and you'll have 20% might be how quickly you can do it, and then 20% is your team, and 20% can be our experience with you in the past, that we know you've done great work with us in the past, so we'll continue that relationship. So you can do that with an RFP. Some municipalities have gone to that RFP process for almost everything. The challenge with that is one, it becomes less quantifiable, so it becomes, I'll say, more subjective, and even how you weight it sometimes can be challenged in court. So you're open to more challenges. You most likely will win, but you still have those legal challenges. So I feel for our municipality, our size, is a time to really start considering tenders only. We should really be looking at each project and going, is this a tender or should we be doing another process? And I would say just in the type of work we've done in the past and to now, tender really does make sense because we're looking for value. We set the parameters on the schedule, and if they don't meet that schedule, then we can disqualify them. But in some future projects where we see where there's a lot more complexity to it, such as a building or even some of the major works that we might do on our water system, we might want to be looking at RFPs. And so what I'd like to, aside from me continuing to talk as everyone's eyes glaze over, is to bring forth to council a description of all of this, and then really it would look something like, I don't want to say a policy, but basically a process that we would follow. And so it would help us define going, oh, this project would be better for this. So then going forward, it's very transparent and we all know what we're doing, if that makes sense.
I think that's much appreciated to give that explanation. And I don't know how you could see our eyes were glazing over. I think we're all waking up and saying, this is a great presentation. Councillor Skipsey.
Okay, thank you very much. Finally, with the open house, there were a number of questions about how correspondence is received and recorded and why it isn't always redacted. And so I have been provided an explanation. Both of us were provided an explanation. So if you want more information about that, we can let you know. But with regard to the comments that are made about the council meeting, it does state right in the agenda that your name and your information would be distributed. So you're agreeing to that when you write. There was a couple mentions about workers and renting out maybe at a more reasonable rate and whatnot, but I came across on the SOS website HappyPad, and I'm not sure how many people are aware of HappyPad, but basically they team up. It says, we're teaming up to help alleviate the housing crisis in the Parksville-Qualicum Beach region, helping match verified homeowners with screened compatible renters looking for a room to rent or want to turn your spare room into extra income. HappyPad provides comprehensive screening, automatic rent payments, and lawyer-drafted rental agreements. So it is another option for people when we're talking about rentals, long-term rentals, and workforce accommodation. And then finally, I'm going to do a plug for the first repair cafe that in this area. It's being held on April 20th at St. Stephen's Church Hall. And there will be representatives from the Zero Waste team will be in attendance, and our Shinjini, our Climate Action and Emergency Program Coordinator, is also going to be there to provide information to residents. There will be volunteer repairers there to repair various items, including small appliances, electronics, tech items, small furniture, bicycles, and we can mend clothes, sharpen knives, and string guitars. So there'll be lots going on, and I would invite people to come. You can bring one item, anything that you can carry, so not too big. And there will be coffee, tea, and cafe settings, so you can come and just check it out, even if you wanted to do for the first time. But we're hoping it'll be a success and the first of many going forward.
Thank you. So you couldn't bring your car to fix your flat there. Councillor Harrison.
Just one thing too with HappyPad, just because it came up at that sort of housing task force meeting, that Susanna Newton is the executive director, and this is like her passion, one of her passion projects. The funding was originally allocated through the homeless task force, and so there was a homeless task force logo on the HappyPad initial sort of public release, but it's not housing for folks who are homeless. It's housing for folks who are low-income seniors, young workers. It's designed to help with our housing crisis. It's not designed to deal with folks who are really, really struggling. And there was some consternation apparently in Parcel when this was initially announced, and folks said, oh my gosh, I would never do this. So please, if you want more information on the program, reach out to SOS, and they'll be able to provide that information. There's just been some unfortunate misinformation circulating at first.
Well, thank you for the additional information. Councillor Vander.
Thank you. Well, once again, I've done my report, and it is in the agenda. I would like to just add one thing, and that is on the 28th of March. Due to unforeseen circumstances, I was not able to attend the Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism Association AGM and launch of their study regarding ways to create more sustainable tourism in the area. But I did ask if there was anything in particular that they wanted me to mention at today's meeting. And probably the most important thing was they wanted me to let people know that if there were housing projects done by a service group, say the Lions or a housing society, that the PQBTA has funds from their MRDT and OAP, which is online accommodation platform monies that they collect, that they could use towards some of the soft costs of the project. They can't really fund getting in the project in a major way, but they do have funding available for some of the soft costs. So again, I think that emphasizes the Tourism Association's concerns about housing for the workforce, and that they're willing to and are putting monies into that. And regarding the launch of their study, I've mentioned this before, but one of the more important things I think came out of the study is that the study found that people were interested in keeping the character of the town. A lot of the tourism is based on what they call place DNA, which is what a place is like, the feel or the vibe or the quality of the place, and that is what they think the town should be building on in terms of increasing and making tourism more sustainable. So that's about it for me. Thank you.
And thank you for your reports, both written and verbally. Appreciate that. Councillor Young.
Okay, fellow councillors Skipsey and myself had a Zoom meeting with the Division of Family Practice, and they have recruited a doctor going into Parksville, and there is to be a clinic to be starting up in Arrington. Meanwhile, we have Flowerstone Society, who is trying to recruit nurse practitioners and doctors by seeking funding to set up turnkey clinics to attract more medical services locally. Also, St. Stephen's Church for their Repair Cafe, that is on Earth Day. And also, I just wanted to reiterate their little tagline, which is reduce waste, save money, meet people, learn skills. And that's at the Repair Cafe. But also on that day, Earth Day, Rotary Club is also organizing a Clean Up Our Community Day from 9 to 12, and it's meet up at the train station on Beach Road to participate in that, and the town is providing the garbage bags and the tongs to pick up and all that. In regards to the Brant Wildlife Festival, if you missed it, there is still on April the 27th from 11 to 3 p.m. There is the annual Hamilton Marsh Tour, which is also about, you know, our environment and the animals that live in our environment. Also, Qualicum Beach Family Day is coming up. May 26th is always the last Sunday of May. Please go to the website for participation registration ASAP, and especially they're needing more volunteers to sign up to help for that day. Also, Qualicum Beach Museum is looking to share via social media campaign pet photos, and because tomorrow is National Pet Day. So if you'd like to submit your pet, please do so to the museum before closing today. The museum is also, we all should visit it once in a while, now has a new art display showcasing how the BC wooden poles were manually put up, much like the Haida First Nation artists when they were erecting their totem poles. Also, one more thing, we do get a lot of emails, and there is also one that is asking for public donations for a trail rider, and if you can go to the Coastal Community Credit Union to submit to that account. I think they need only about $3,200 right now. It needs to be in by the end of April. We had a discussion about a trail rider earlier in our year about how it can allow more accessibility for those people that are mobility challenged. And so now we have someone privately that is trying to buy a used trail rider, and it'd be nice if we can support that. And it'll be available for mobility challenged people to use and to enjoy our environment. Thanks.
Thank you. And just for everybody's information, only what is written and submitted to staff will be in the minutes. It's great to have these latest updates, and some happened just a few days ago. So I think it's good for the public who is here and also watches later to have that information, but we do not expect the staff actually record all that or has information about it. But I appreciate all the information and all the work that you do as a council to attend many of these events and functions. With that, we have corporate administration, and there is a whole list of these, 6 of them, for a subsidized rental application, and we can take all those in one motion. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Harrison, that's from 1 to 6. So Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Harrison moved all 6 applications. Discussion, all in favor? Opposed, if any, carried unanimously. Thank you. And then a special event application for the Qualicum Woods Residents Association. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Harrison, discussion. It's on June 9th, 12 to 4. I was there last year. It's a very nice event, actually. So further discussion, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried unanimously. Planning, Mr. Sales.
My apologies. I was taking notes and minutes at the same time. So yes, so the next item on the agenda addresses a potential grant application that has been proposed by our Climate Action and Climate Action and Emergency Program Coordinator in collaboration with counterparts at the Regional District of Nanaimo and City of Parksville. So the council has seen a number of grant applications brought forward to council. Some of them are led by the town, some of them are led by a partner organization, and this is one where the Regional District would be leading the process for this public notification and evacuation route planning exercise. It will be supported by the City of Parksville and the town of Qualicum Beach. So essentially all the funding opportunity would be pooled with the Regional District of Nanaimo. I think that the importance of this type of work was made very clear last summer with the shutdown of the highway going to Port Alberni. So evacuation routes are kind of first and foremost in the minds of many of our residents. So staff do recommend advancing this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison, Councillor Skipsey. Well, this is kind of like emergency preparedness, which is sort of in your bailiwick. So it's been moved by Councillor Harrison, second by Councillor Skipsey. And I think we can take them, we'll take them one at a time. So any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any, carried. And for the second one, Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander, discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any, carried. Mr. Sales.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is another grant application, and this addresses an area that Council identified and reviewed during the strategic planning process. The town has allocated $50,000 towards the energy audit and exploration of potential GHG reduction initiatives with regard to town buildings. So in order to fully undertake that process, we do need to leverage the town funding with funding from another organization. In this case, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has a grant application that is open. So we are proposing to apply for $195,000, which would leverage the town's funds to be able to undertake a project with an estimated maximum budget of $245,000. So the recommendation is to authorize staff to submit that application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Young, Councillor Vander, Valk, discussion. Councillor Harrison.
Just through the chair to Mr. Sales. So previously we were doing a building essentially audit for the state of our buildings. I'd imagine obviously the fact that we're applying for this, it didn't include greenhouse gas emissions so much. But I'm just wondering, I thought we were expecting to get that report back this year. So would this be something then we'd be getting a report the year after, I'm assuming, that sort of build off of that report? I just want to make sure that we're not, delaying the first report is what I'm trying to get at.
Thank you. Mr. Sales.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison. So there are several GHG-related initiatives in Council's strategic plan. One is a community-wide energy emissions report, which that information was made available earlier this year. The regional district actually commissioned that report, and so that information is available. This report is, I would describe as an expansion in scope from what we discussed at the strategic planning process, because if we can leverage this money, not only will the town have an overview of where those GHG emissions opportunities are, where we can reduce GHG emissions, but also to undertake some of the preliminary design and costing so that we could go straight out of this type of a process into another grant application to apply for, say, $1 million to retrofit one of the town's buildings. So this is a step towards actually building the project, and this grant funding will actually let us do the design work to prepare for that. Thank you.
Great. Councillor Harrison.
Just to follow up, though, that wasn't quite the question, although I do agree with the rationale. Like, I do think it's quite reasonable. But the question was just more that initial report on the status of our buildings, is that something we'll still be receiving, or is that going to be pushed back?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison, my apologies. Yeah, I was confusing the two initiatives. So you are correct that if we do apply for this grant, it would likely delay the report to council in terms of the audit of municipal buildings. Thank you.
Councillor Harrison. Councillor Skipsey.
Well, I'll just mention that this is definitely supported by the members of the Environment and Sustainability Committee. We haven't put forward to council yet the measures for mitigation, but this is certainly one of them, or in line with one of them.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion? Councillor Harrison.
And I do agree with this, and I think this is a great step to do. But I would point out too, I mean, recently I was looking at State of Oregon and EPA data on building typology and life cycle emissions, and comparing single-family homes to other building types. And single-family homes basically over life cycle are responsible for twice as much pollution as a denser building form. Even sort of like the things we see more in our downtown, two stories of buildings above a commercial, say, something like that. Just because there's units are smaller and there's less driving to be done. So I do hope when we start looking at how can we reduce our emissions as a community, I know the RDN, that was sort of their study, and I'm assuming Mr. Sales is liaising. I hope we're not just looking at our buildings, because that's going to be a very small portion of our emissions as a town, and looking instead at how we're actually doing planning in a way that actually has that life cycle reduction would be really important.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councillor Skipsey. All in favour? Opposed, if any? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Engineers and operations. Who'd like to start off with that? Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Worship. I think we got a presentation available. There we go. So the next couple minutes, I'm just going to go over an update, a quarterly update of our capital projects that we've got on the go. Next slide, please. The first one being the Beach Creek viewing platform. So that project is well underway. The deck has been poured, the forms have been stripped, And although it doesn't look like there isn't anything going on at the moment, what is actually going on behind the scenes is the company is fabricating the railings, which is one of the last major components of that project. It's a bit of a challenging process because those railings are all on an arch and going up a grade, so it's not a simple fabrication. We are hoping that will be open to the public around the end of May. Next slide, please. The Crescent Road Beach Creek Culvert Replacement Project. So that bid closed on March 20th, and Stalker Excavating was the successful bidder on that project. They will be starting somewhere around the first week of June. They'll be closing the road to all traffic and pedestrians from around the first week of June to the end of September. There will be no access available, period. There will be a very large excavation, so you won't be able to get through if you really wanted to anyways. It'll only be closed over top of the culvert, so access will be available on St. Andrews Road still. The next project is the Coastal Spit Restoration. So that project is the last phase of the roundabout project, which includes two major components. One is the rock work that will complete the coastal spit, and the other is the revegetation of the estuary around the coastal spit there. That did go out to tender. Unfortunately, we did not get any bids, so we are working on separating the two major components of that contract and putting that back out to tender, because we are supposed to get that done this summer. It's also a project that was fully grant funded, and it's part of our requirements, as part of our wildlife permit to complete that work. So we have to proceed. Next slide, please. The Rupert Road water looping project. So that project is out to tender right now. It's a 1.4 kilometer new water main installation that connects the end of the line on Rupert Road near Qualicum Road to the airport entrance. There will be a water pressure reducing valve kiosk near Sparrow Road along the shoulder. You'll see that behind the guardrail when that's constructed. The purpose of the project is to improve resiliency of the water supply for the Chartwell subdivision and the Sandpiper subdivision. So we're estimating it to be about a $1.5 million project, and $720,000 of that is coming from the RDN. The next project is the Quatna Road water main replacement. So that's a 60-meter section of asbestos cement water main that is in failing condition down an unopened right-of-way on Quatna Road off of Hull Road. So that will be an upgrade to PVC water main as well as a new hydrant. And we are getting very close to putting that out to tender. Next slide, please. The Bay Street road reconstruction. So for those of you that have traveled down Bay Street, you'll have recognized the guardrail that is tipping over the edge of the road there. That's been settling for many years, and we are planning to restore that this year. It is in the budget for this summer, and it is currently a design phase. One of the challenges with that particular project is when you're restoring the slope, you normally start at the toe of the road. However, in this case, the toe is well into private property, so we are working on alternative remedies to keep our work within the town right away. I think they've got a method, they're just working out the bugs, so stay tuned on that. The Community Transportation Plan. We did receive $3,500 from ICBC towards a safety improvement, and we took one off of the Community Transportation Plan list. It was the upgrade of the old round LED pedestrian crossing lights on Laburnum Road at Claymore. So that little project has been completed, and this spring we are also working on more pedestrian crossings, one on Bennett Road at Sunrise, where the Dolly Mount Trail crosses. There is no pedestrian crossing there yet. There will be. Not only zebra stripes crossing the road, but also the rapid flashing lights will be installed there. We are also going to try out some new solar-powered street lights at that location to see how effective they are, because the road at that particular location is rather dark. And the same goes for the crossing that we are going to be doing on Jones Street at Fern on the way into the Civic Center. We have a design there for the upgrade of to lights at that location, both the pedestrian crossing lights as well as solar-powered street lights. So that should be done before the summer. Next slide, please. The Highway 19A ditch infill project. This will be phase 2. So last year we completed phase 1 of the infill, which was essentially filling in the ditch with culvert and widening the shoulder to produce a wide enough area to both park cars parallel as well as a shared use path. So this year we have just been advised that we were successful in receiving a $500,000 grant towards the about $878,000 project from the BC Active Transportation Program to continue on with that project. And a little later on in the slideshow, I'll show you exactly where those locations are going to be. The final drawings are being prepared right now, and we are anticipating to start that midsummer. We're just waiting for some permits to come back before we can officially start. Next slide, please. The airport avgas tank replacement. So that was currently a 20,000 liter underground aviation gasoline tank at our airport. We sell gas to local planes and the commercial planes. That project is well underway. The tank arrived this morning, the new tank. So the new tank is being positioned on the pad right now and will be totally commissioned before we remove the old underground system. So that project should be complete by the end of this month here. Next project, please. Runway 2911 and adjacent taxiways rehabilitation project. So this was a project where we hired consultants to come and perform a pavement assessment on our taxiways, airport runway, and the major apron that we have there. So the purpose of the assessment is to produce a report so that we can provide or submit for ACAP funding. ACAP is Federal Airport Capital Assistance Program. If we're successful, we'll get 100% fully grant funded to replace all that asphalt, which could be around $2 million. Tetra Tech was awarded that contract there not very long ago, and they have completed their field investigation and are currently working on the report, which will be submitted to ACAP at the end of May. And next project, please. So our water pump house and hardware upgrades. So we have a water system that relies on wells in our well fields and reservoirs, and in both locations, or all of our locations, there's quite a few pump houses. We have computer hardware that triggers the pumps to come on and off when required to keep our water reservoirs topped up. The hardware, the electrical hardware, it's called a SCADA program, is reaching the end of its life. A lot of the components are obsolete, so we have been this is the tail end of a multi-year computer hardware upgrade. And though that was an early budget approval item because it takes up to a year to retrieve some of those parts. So those parts have been ordered, and we're just waiting for them to arrive for the installation. Next project. So the Highway 19A bollards. So this was a project that staff completed just recently, which was the installation of the plastic bollards along two sections of Highway 19A along the waterfront in areas that were signed as no parking. The reason they're signed as no parking is because the shoulders are narrow in these locations, and when cars are parked there, pedestrians are forced to use the traveled portion to get to their destination, pedestrians and cyclists. So it was creating an unsafe condition. Next phase. This is the last slide. So this is further to the 19A parking improvements. This project in general was initiated on the 2016 Waterfront Master Plan, specifically to improve the shoulders so that we created a separated lane for pedestrians and cyclists. So last summer, the upgrade consisted of about 370 meters of shoulder that was widened, creating about 53 spots. This spring, we installed the bollards. Maybe I forgot to mention the bollards were placed there specifically to stop people from parking there. Last summer, after the signs were installed, people ignored the signs, and pedestrians and cyclists were forced to use the travel portion. So that's why we looked at a bunch of options, brought it forward to council, and got council support to go ahead with the installation of those bollards that we see now. And lastly, this summer, we've just been advised that we were successful in receiving a grant to continue on with the infill of parking, and that you can kind of see it on the overhead there on the far outer edges. The purple indicates the 2 locations in which we will be expanding the parking this summer. That's another 260 meters of road shoulder that will be widened to create about 37 spots and shared use pathway. The green on that map there indicates the areas that were upgraded last year, and the red indicate the shoulders where the parking, where there isn't enough space between the edge of the white line and the embankment behind the pavement to widen the shoulder to create both the shared path and parking. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Questions to staff? Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, thank you very much. So just 2 things. First thing is for the spit, basically doing the plantings and really finishing up that project, the award-winning project, might I add, from the town. And I was just wondering, is there any risk, because we have tight timelines with the grant of I can't recall if it's provincial or federal, I think it's probably joint, if there's any issue with potentially the grant not being extended?
Mr. Watson.
Thank you. Before we get to that point, I think we do have the ability to get the contractors in to complete this project in time. Yeah, I'm not to that point yet.
Okay, thank you very much. I know from what I was told previously by staff in years gone by, usually higher levels of government will give you more time if you can show in good faith you've been trying to get the work done, but usually is a very interesting word. Second thing too is just on the bollards. I got an email, I got a phone call, I think the mayor did too, about some folks who were not they themselves, but what they oversaw. Some folks who were very upset about the bollards going in, and they were furious, and this is a disgrace and it's horrible, and they were apparently yelling at the folks who were installing them. Please don't yell at the people who are doing work for the town. I know it seems a bit obvious, but please don't do that. If you're very frustrated, please reach out to either your elected officials or to our lovely CAO and maybe dial things down 1 or 2 notches before you have that phone call. Yeah, please don't be really rude to our staff. They're doing their job. They're not making the decisions about things. If you strongly disagree with the decision, they're not the folks who made that decision. They're just doing the work, so please don't take it out on them.
Thank you, and that's why I asked to have that picture with the bollards so that people could see it, not just us here, but online. Anybody can see why. What was the reasoning behind putting those bollards, not to be miserable, but for safety purposes. Anything else from council? I just want to say thank you to all of staff, planning, finance, engineering, to show us what your taxes are doing. These are your taxes at work, and I think the projects that were chosen were basically because of the strategic plan, and in the age-friendly are now called community traffic plan. So well done. Thank you. Councillor Young.
Yes, thank you for all the extensive work and all the planning that you're doing. One little question, because it's been brought up previous, is along the railroad tracks, are we going to deal with maybe changing them to yield signs instead of stop signs, or have we been able to contact the higher level of government to see what they can do for us?
Mr. Dickinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. We've been talking with a consultant. It's an interesting place because normally they wouldn't let us, but because the railway hasn't been used for so long, we're trying to get, frankly, a transportation engineer to give us the green light professionally that we can put them as yield signs. And there's conversations on several levels with Transport Canada as well as the province, Island Corridor Foundation, as well as our transportation engineer looking at the volumes of traffic that we're talking about. So it's surprisingly more complex than I anticipated. I thought I would have an answer by now, bluntly. We're still working on it.
And I mentioned that also to our Premier when he was in town a couple of weeks ago. And I specifically pointed out the railway crossing because he was parked very nearby. And I said, the reason why we cannot improve the intersection, which is needed, is partly because of that railway, which is not being used. And also because a lot of people feel that there's no need to stop because they know there's no train. And then so we used to going through a stop sign without even slowing down. The next stop sign will blow that one through. So it becomes a bad habit, and you're making people break the laws because the law makes no sense. So he told me he would remember that and bring it up with Minister Fleming to try and address both those issues. And the witness to all this was our famous Juno Award-winning Phil Dwyer, who was nodding his head. He said, I still stop. And I said, well, that's good. You have to, because everybody would know if you didn't. So thank you for your work. Appreciate that. Anything else? And there's a staff recommendation, but that comes up for the pollinator pathways. So who's going to speak to that? You move it because that makes sense. Okay. So discussion. No, sorry. Need a seconder. Councillor Harrison seconded. Councillor Skipsey moved. Councillor Harrison seconded. Discussion. All in favour? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Yeah, we just approved that.
Can I just have one question?
After it's approved, after it's off the agenda.
No,
that's okay. Thank you. But we can talk about it after. So 1900 made Bollards, no parking, verbal update from staff. I think we just got that. Thank you. And then the beach bathroom shower conversion. Did you want to speak to that, Mr. Watson?
Yes, thank you. So as we know, we got the beach washrooms down at the waterfront there. This report is a recommendation that council approves converting the existing beach bathroom showers to change rooms equipped with timed auto lock systems. So in 2018, our beach bathrooms underwent some renovations, and at that time, 2 rooms, or storage rooms on the west end of the building were converted to showers with change rooms. However, shortly after opening, we began to experience quite a few sewer backups. And it took us a little while to figure out what the cause was, but after sending a camera up through the pipe, we learned that too much sand was going down the shower stalls and was causing the backups. So 2 years ago, we closed the beach bathroom showers, and they've been closed ever since. So most recently, we've had some staff discussions about what to do going forward, and one of the recommendations was, instead of spending quite a bit of money to install sand traps in each of those 2 showers and then having to maintain those on a regular basis, do without the showers and just open those 2 rooms up as change rooms. So financially, it would cost about $5,200 to convert those 2 rooms to just the change rooms. Most of the money is actually in the addition of the auto lock systems. And those auto locks would be necessary to make sure that those rooms get locked up at night so we don't experience vandalism, and also for the safety reasons for our night shift who go in and clean those restrooms. They don't want to walk in on someone having a snooze inside there. Thank you.
Thank you for the update. And there is a council staff recommendation. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander, Councillor Harrison.
Just briefly, one question. So I remember coming down to, well, we usually went to beach acres as a kid, and you'd be in the ocean and you'd come up on the sand. You'd have a little bit of sand on your feet as a little kid. I'm just wondering, do we have any like faucets that are in the open air outside, so you don't need to do a full shower, just be able to wash the sand off your feet?
So we have both. Mr. Watson.
Thank you, through Chair. Yeah, we do have the outdoor shower just east of the beach bathrooms there. And yes, there's a foot shower there too.
Great, yeah. And the only other thing too is I'm sure if someone was really close to the auto lock timer, there'd be a way for them to get out.
Through the Chair, yes. There is a button that releases the door. So it's basically a magnetic door. We have it on all of our accessible bathrooms. We have experienced that in others. Yeah, you push a button, you can get out.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Councillor Skipsey.
Well, having joined the students of Qualicum Beach Elementary School on Beach Day down there, I think the change rooms would be a welcome addition. There's never enough space, and you don't always want to change in the washroom. So I think I will fully support this idea.
Thank you. It has been moved and seconded for the discussion. All in favor? Councillor Harrison.
Just one last thing too, it's not really germane to what we're doing here, but just flagging for the Accessibility Committee, there are discussions sometimes about some doors and folks in wheelchairs being able to open the doors and be able to get out of some of the washrooms. That's been an issue for some folks. It's not germane to this, but just flagging this as we're thinking in the future.
Well, that's actually a good question. Is that being considered with a change?
We haven't considered that part yet. I don't think there's enough room inside those two small rooms to maneuver a wheelchair. If it was me, I would recommend using the accessible bathrooms that we already have there, which already have the doors to the automatic doors that open, and there's a lot more space in there for someone to maneuver.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Harrison, for the discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Before we adjourn, I got a note from Ms. Petronella. You have a, Councillor Vander, you have a question?
Yeah. I just was wondering, it may not be a good time to do it, but when we were talking about the short-term rentals,
I have to point of order. Once an item has been dealt with, we're not going back. That's why I said no. You have to pay attention, because then we start all over again. So I'm sorry, I asked council whether that was fair, and they all said yes. So once an issue has been dealt with and voted on, we don't bring it back.
Okay. All right, I'll have to
next time
speak with you about it then. Thanks.
So all we need now is a motion to adjourn, but before I do that, anybody who wants to make a comment about what happened today, any issue, please write it in. There was instructions of how you can do that, and those comments will be part of the agenda. So, Ms. Varela, do we always put the names of people who write in when they make a comment on the issues brought up at the council meeting?
Current practice right now, Your Worship, is we are discussing at corporate services if we should be redacting names as well, but if we could come back to you on that. Currently, the names are being published, the addresses are being redacted.
Yeah, because we made a transition when people used to come up to the microphone, state their name and address, and then say stuff, whatever they had on their mind based on what happened at the council meeting. But I think this is a better way. You have some time to think about it, write it, and you will see your entire comment with your name at the next agenda. Thank you. With that, a motion to adjourn. Councillor Vander, Councillor Skipsey, we are adjourned. Thank you.